I give a fuck? Why do I give a fuck? Why do I try so hard? Why do I care so much?
Welcome to Why Do I Give a Fuck? A cross-cultural conversation between myself, Diane Tate,
and Johanna Thompson. In these times of great struggle and possible shift, we ask ourselves,
why do we give a fuck about any of it? How does the lens we see the world through impact what we see?
And what do we do about it?
What do we do about it?
I don't know.
We have a fun conversation to kind of discuss some of the things that we could do about when folks are wild out here in these streets.
I'm telling you, man. I'm telling you, there are so many things to talk about. And it's been a minute. I mean, I know that when people watch this, they don't necessarily know the cadence of when we've recorded it, but it's been a minute since we've recorded an episode together. And I have to say, I've missed it. I have people in my life that I can talk about things that I give a fuck about that I'm going through, but I don't think I realized how much these conversations help me process my angst. And so when we don't have them, I'm like, I gotta talk to Jay.
Yeah, no, that's real. And the truth of the matter, we don't just talk when we're on here.
Right.
We definitely give ourselves the conversation, but then there is the opportunity to share the conversations with everyone. And there's some stuff that's been going on that's really fun not fun, but curious to be having a conversation on what your understanding is, because the news of the day is Lindsey Graham dying. And well, first of all, why is that the news of the day? I want to contextually have a conversation about so much effort and emphasis into this man. Lindsey Graham has died, and we know that he served our country for a long period of time, a U.S. Senator out of South Carolina. You actually were giving me a lot of the update about him because I just visited South Carolina, as we all know, but I don't know anything about how they're doing their politics or how much impact he had, especially with the position that he had as a U.S. Senator and where he was placed in his role on different committees. And so, yeah, you're kind of giving me the South Carolina good old rundown. So let me know what it looks like so that other people can know as well.
Yeah. So at the time of this recording, Lindsey Graham, I woke up yesterday morning and that was at the top of my feed was that he had died. And I got to say, I know people are going to, maybe bristle at this, but I was happy. Because he is a man who has been in that seat since 2003. He's got a lot of power in the Senate, and he's also an avowed racist, homophobic, misogynistic. He is one of the top people. Mitch McConnell, which right now, we don't even know if Mitch is alive. I don't think he is. But I don't think they've told us that he's dead yet because they want to wait until after a deadline, but we can get into that in a minute. So Mitch McConnell and Donald Trump are three of the most powerful white male humans in the U.S. government right now. And so
respects to what we're talking about is respects to our economic policy and our power positions. And I want to run this back because, when we're on podcasts and things go out, I heard you say that you were happy. What you're happy is that there's an open seat in South Carolina and not so much that a man has died, or both. Let me check it. I shouldn't.
Yeah. I know people are going to think this is horrible. In fact, my husband's at the top of that list.
Talk that truth about it.
I get it.
Yeah.
But I think we have to be better about not normalizing. I think our society has gotten very big into the T's and P's, thoughts and prayers after somebody dies. And I'm not saying that I'm not suggesting that on the surface, celebrating somebody's death is not a horrible thing. I'm not suggesting that. I understand that compulsion for people to be like, oh my God, you're celebrating somebody's death. You're a horrible human. What I'm celebrating is that he is no longer empowered to create harm for other people, which is what he has done the entire time he has been in that position of power in a state that is so deeply red that he could not be unseated. He was running for re-election in November, and his opponent is Dr. Annie Andrews, who is a white woman from the Low Country, from the Charleston area, who is a pediatrician. And she has run before. She has run against Tim Scott before. This is not her first rodeo, but she hasn't learned a whole lot about how to do this better and differently. She's doing the white woman thing in her run, and many would say that know a lot more about this than I do, that it's really just a money raising enterprise, because in South Carolina it is very hard to get these deeply racist Republican seat holders out of their seats. And so many people felt it was a futile, uphill, it was a futile run for her. And so the fact that he's, by virtue of God, gone, and that, someone else is going to have to, South Carolina, the governor will appoint somebody to fill his seat in the interim, because he was running for re-election, and that election is November, and they will organize a special primary, because the primaries have already happened in South Carolina, to try to find a Republican candidate to run against Annie Andrews. And that person will not have the institutional heft and fortitude that Lindsey Graham had. So it is possible that if the people of South Carolina decide that Annie Andrews is a viable candidate, that she could potentially take that seat, which would be a huge upset. So yes, I know that on the surface, it sounds like I'm a horrible human for celebrating his death, but he celebrated the death of many, many Palestinians over the past 3 years. He has been at the forefront of the death of many, many humans in his ability to appropriate funds for warmongering all over the world, not just in Gaza. There is immense blood on his hands for the amount of people that have died at the hand or at the end of the decisions that he has not only made, but driven through the Senate to create money for bombs to kill other humans in other parts of the world. So the list of harm of people that have been harmed by his actions over the course of his political life is longer than it probably would wrap around the earth at least once. And so am I happy that person does no longer have the ability to cause harm to other humans? Absolutely. I am happy for that. And if his death is the only way that we could get him out of that seat and get him away from that power, then I guess that's what had to happen.
I wanted to offer a clarification. First of all, there is sometimes in different cultures, because I just came from New Orleans, where there is a celebration of life. So I want to give that context for people that are outside of the United States, that in New Orleans, when somebody has passed, there is something called the second line, which is a celebration of how they existed in the world and life. And it's really a most magnificent celebration. So people can come into understanding what death looks like in different ways. That's the first thing I wanted to say. And then the second thing I wanted to say is all of this harm and violence, as a non-white person, I am thinking about when there are like these very vocal racist folks who are died, killed, murdered, whatever, there is a lot of effort and energy amongst our news and our media communicating this to everyone. Like there's a huge attention, and that really speaks to, like, to me, I'm thinking, why are we putting this much attention on it? And it really is speaking to what you were talking about, is how much power this person holds, to be thinking about somebody who has these ideologies and created so much harm, had so much power in the United States. You cannot ignore that is like something that's foundational in the way that we exist. And I'm also thinking about, there's a human that sat in that place, but then there's also structures that have been set up to allow that human's violence and harm and power to continue on for such a long period of time. And like, what does it look like for us to be thinking about how that shifts, regardless of who's put into that seat? You were talking about the primary that's going to happen. It's just going to be happening for the Republican Party. And there's suggestions, as you're communicating, like from Donald Trump, to have his sister sit in that seat. What do you think are some of the implications of who is going to fill that seat if it's not the person who is the person that's running up from the Democratic Party. For a Republican to come into that seat, considering the culture of South Carolina, the structures and the way that they legislate in South Carolina, what could be the possible impact, regardless of who is put in place?
I guess
was the question clear?
I'm not sure. Impact on who, I guess, is my question. I mean, there's going to be a lot of impact.
Layers. Yeah. Because there's South Carolina, but then whoever takes his position, they will be kind of a new person in the role. Would they lose their committee seats and lose the amount of power? They might not until the November election, but
right.
Is there a moment where there's a woosah, and that means like just an exhale of the impact of the person who is already in the seat, incumbent in the seat? Do we have a moment as this transition occurs to shift the foundations of how people have been impacted by him being in that seat for so long?
I don't know if we have that moment. I think based on what I heard you just say, he was the ranking member on the Appropriations Committee, which in the U.S. Senate, that is a very powerful committee, because that is a committee that decides where money is allocated. And he was a huge, if it was a war, especially on Black and brown humans, let's go for it. Let's give you every dollar you could possibly get. And so his voice not being there anymore. So I think to your point, the person that gets put in that seat temporarily until the elections happen in November, and then whoever gets in that seat, after the elections happen, the committees can go through an adjustment period. The person that takes his seat is not necessarily going to get on the Appropriations Committee,
right,
unless that person shares the same values or lack thereof of Senator Graham. If that person is in alignment with what Graham supported and affected, then they may very well follow him in that to fill that seat, because they don't want that particular ideology to disappear from the committee. They're not going to have the ranking member. He was the ranking member, which means he was the longest serving member because he's been in that seat since 2003. I don't know how long he's been on the committee, but he was the ranking member in that committee. They're not going to be able to walk into that moniker, right? Because they just joined. So there is a power shift on some level just by virtue of the fact that he was holding such a powerful position, and there's not anybody necessarily that his replacement won't necessarily qualify based on certain criteria, right?
Yeah, definitely not, because new members coming in cannot get placed.
Can't get ranking member. Yeah, somebody else will become the next person that served the longest on that committee will get that ranking member title. Chances are good they share some of Lindsey's, opinions and ideologies, and so therefore his missions might continue, but his particular voice and his particular level of power and his particular level of amplification that our government and our mainstream media and everybody knows who Lindsey Graham is. So that person is not necessarily going to share that same level of amplification that he had. I think in South Carolina, in my opinion, the governor is going to be mostly concerned with making sure that the balance of power stays the same. They don't want to lose that control that they have.
South Carolina way of being.
I know. And they don't want to rock the boat. So, so the Annie Andrews run against Senator Graham is largely considered by those that I listen to and that I know are very knowledgeable in South Carolina politics. It's a futile exercise. She's not going to win, it's not.
But now, is there the possibility, depending on who wins?
It depends on Annie Andrews. And so I want to say, Annie, if you're listening right now, all right, I'm not I don't pretend to be an expert in politics, but if you're listening, Annie, this is a unique opportunity to shift. You do not have to be a placeholder anymore just to raise money. Figure out what your platform is and stand on it 10 toes down and listen to what your constituents are telling you they want, and stand on it 10 toes down, because you have an opportunity. Graham is gone. He's not. Yeah.
I want to interject because this is really curious to me, because it's like, listen to your constituents. Who in South Carolina do you listen to? Because what I experienced in South Carolina was that folks like the way that South Carolina existed.
And that is true. That is true. A lot of her constituents, white people. I mean, she's running a statewide, campaign, which is very different than a local campaign in terms of, she's not just dealing with her constituents being one district, but it's the whole state. There are a lot of people in South Carolina that want something different. There are also a lot that still want it to stay the same. There are a lot that say they want something different, but they only want it different within the confines of the sameness. So if you follow that train of thought, kudos to you. But it can often be a pretend or a performative level of we want change. And in my opinion, Andy represents that. She is a pediatrician, she is a woman, but she is a white woman. And and I don't know how much of her white womanness she's unpacked enough to really fully see and hear where there are places in her run, because she's running very similarly to how she's done in the past, which tells me, she's ran against Nancy Mace before, who is another vocal Republican from South Carolina. She's ran against Tim Scott, I believe. She's done this, not her first rodeo, but her platform doesn't change a whole lot. And so that tells me she's not learning a whole lot about how she needs to move differently. And is she super serious? Does she really want this seat?
To be there, yeah.
And
what does that look like to get it?
Outcome? Yeah.
And I think that this conversation is important. Like, if we look at more of the national context, again, going into South Carolina, because it models like the nation, this is a conversation about the folks that are like incumbent in their seats on our nation, like our U.S. senators, our U.S. Congress people, our Supreme Court members at this point.
Yeah.
What ideologies are they aligned with? And when there are moments to shift the structural foundation that does create a light of violence and harm, it's up to us as voters also to seek this opportunity and hold accountability to the folks that are in representation as to what it is that we want to see. My concern with the election of Donald Trump and the administration that exists today is that in the background, people are comfortable with this ideology of getting to, this greatness that doesn't exist on U.S. territory.
He's using lots of air quotes for those that are just listening.
Oh yeah, sorry.
There's a lot of air quotes going on today.
My voice, the pauses that I'm making is like I'm talking in staccato, because I'm like, the truth of the matter is, if we're looking at South Carolina and we're looking at how that is a model for how our nation is actually operating and existing, I am hoping that voters are thinking about holding the representatives accountable. As I was taking a walk, I'm happy in California right now, Northern California, so like a kind of more progressive ideology. I'm in Marin County, folks with a lot of wealth and modeling power in the way that they want to in their local community. And there was a sign on someone's building that said, are we getting towards that great America again? Because all I feel right now is embarrassed. And I laughed so hard. I'm going to take a picture of it. And I'm curious if enough people feel embarrassed about the way that we're existing to really be intentional about creating change by showing up to vote and showing up to really demonstrate where your values are.
Yeah.
And if the values are, a white nation, then how those folks that don't benefit under those type of systems adjust?
Yeah. I think that's one of the biggest dichotomies of our society in this country as a whole, is that we bitch and moan in between elections about what's happening. and I'm using the term we as a collective only because the numbers bear out that when we look at election numbers and we look at how many people are registered to vote and then how many people actually show up, it is always a huge discrepancy between who could vote and who does.
Mm-hmm.
And that's not breaking it down on racial lines. That's just saying, period.
People.
People across. I'm not even entering, even though a racial analysis is important as a part of that conversation.
Racial, gender analysis.
Just on a general statement of the U.S., we are, and I'm not saying. I think there's a lot that goes into that. There's generation after generation after generation of being taught that our vote didn't matter, I'm not political. I don't know anything about this stuff. I can't speak to it. That's why I get on people when I say, you are political. Everything is political. When you go to the grocery store and you buy groceries, every purchase you make is political. You are a political human, but you've been told that you're not because you've been taught that it's dirty, that it's wrong, that political is just divisiveness, that it's just arguing, that it's just power grabbing. And it is all of those things because we don't engage, because our electorate has been taught over so many generations that our engagement doesn't matter. And so there's fault to be laid and had for the people that have spun the narrative, but there's also responsibility and accountability to the people that have bought the narrative to say, if we can't stand up and decide. I mean, I remember when I lived in South Carolina and I was working with the Poor People's Campaign leading up to an election. I don't remember which one it was. And we were talking on the street. We were canvassing people about where they registered to vote. Had they checked their registration? Because South Carolina loves to bump black and brown people off the rolls.
That's what I want to talk about.
and I would say to them, they were like, oh, I don't vote. Well, my vote doesn't matter. And I would say, if your vote didn't matter, they would not be working so hard to stop you from voting. They would not be working so hard to close the DMV so that you can't get a license or an identification that you can use at the polls so that you can vote. They would not be doing all of these things if your vote didn't matter. So how can we change that narrative in our minds? Because we've been taught that for so long. Very similar to whiteness, we've been taught that white supremacy is the way we should live for so long that it takes an enormous amount of effort to unpack it and to see it and to pull those blinders away from our eyes and to see how we communicate and how we benefit and how we continue to profit from it. So
that's a harder conversation to have, though, in this moment when we know that there's been a significant amount of gerrymandering, there's been redistricting and all of that redistricting so that you can quiet the black and brown vote. We know in Florida in particular,
in South Carolina for sure.
Yes. Any place in the South that people are being stripped of their ability to vote, that they're coming up with laws and rules to quiet to shift. They've messed with the 14th Amendment. You know what I mean? So in a significant major way to make sure that the policy and the legislations and the foundation that does support the violence and harm rather than creating opportunities for people to flourish in the ways that they need to in the United States. It becomes a harder conversation as we're going into this primary and then, next year into the general election, when we've been seeing all of the efforts that are being made to make sure that the vote remains in a specific demographic. And I'm going to just say it, the white, identified demographic who has not been showing up to the polls with the same numbers as we were talking about. And so because they're not, they've decided and I'm again, air quotes, and I'm talking about our legislators, our legislators and our government have recognized this trend and the concern with the fact that those who do show up to vote are not aligned with Project 2025's goals, because that's what we're sitting in right now, looking at how are we best able to achieve Project 2025 goals. And if we let a majority of the US population actually have an opportunity to come out and vote, thinking about those who do come out and vote, we will be where we've been with different administrations and being able to move forward with our agenda and Project 2025. And that's a really important thing, because if people are going out and engaging voters, it's an important thing to acknowledge the level of effort that is being developed to shift the vote. And I'm curious, because the redistricting has happened and the gerrymandering is occurring, how much of votes will be counted. One vote will be counted. And that's a conversation that we cannot act like is not real to have in this election.
Right. So I'm not blaming, disenfranchisement, gerrymandering, redistricting, all of those things have been happening. There are efforts in certain states that right now to change it from one person, one vote to one household, one vote.
One vote.
And then guess who's going to be the one in the household that can vote? It's going to be the man.
Know.
It's not going to be the woman. And so we are.
It's flipping us really, really back.
There are very real efforts, and so that's what I'm saying is that I'm acknowledging that we've had generations, dare I say maybe 100 years of working to make people believe, make the general electorate believe that we are without power in these circumstances. And in many ways we aren't, because legislation has changed to stop the power from happening. So in South Carolina specifically, with Lindsey's situation, and with, quite honestly, Representative Clyburn is another one who has been in his seat for 30 years. He is a Black man, but he is the only one that they have allowed to continue. I'm using air quotes again, allowed to continue in that seat. And there's a reason for it. His district has not improved in any way, shape, or form over the course of his time in that office. And so he is the one that they will allow to be there.
That's the status quo. That is the status quo.
Right.
You are welcome to be here as long
as you don't stay in your place. Yes, stay in your place.
That is the ideology, and that is like the white supremacy of the white supremacy of the U.S. nation that we exist in. Please be here. We need you here to serve as long as you stay in your place and we maintain the power. And when we're feeling like we don't maintain the power, we are going to change the rules so that we do maintain the power. And that's a difficult place to find yourself engaging. That doesn't shift how I want to engage voting, but it does mean like, yes, I'm making the effort to, either do my mail-in ballot or come across from the island so that I can actually vote.
Yeah.
And if my vote is shifted because my district is shifted where the power of the vote lies in the hands of white folks who want things to look a certain way, then I've made an effort that I don't know how to actually be counted as a part of.
Right. But
that's the fuckery of the day.
Absolutely.
It's the fuckery of the day.
That's why as the electorate, we have to stay, everybody. So these are the things that I originally, when we were talking about why am I happy that Lindsey Graham is dead, going back to that kind of thought process is I want us to normalize not celebrating the life of someone who caused immense harm. I think it's okay that we don't particularly mourn a human who was such an incredible, harmful human in their stance of power. I know that people bring up people like Hitler a lot when they like to do comparisons, but I'm like, to me, he's the ultimate picture of a person who caused immense harm. And is anybody happy that he's gone? We
don't celebrate the harm.
Why do we have to whitewash all of that and gaslight people into believing that Lindsey Graham did not cause harm to their personhood, their familyhood, their statehood, their whatever? So I think that's the first thing. And I think the second thing is all of us, even in the face of what's happening right now with Project 2025, I completely acknowledge and agree that the efforts to disenfranchise and make it impossible for people's votes to count have ramped up exponentially during this administration. And so we have a window. The people of South Carolina have a window of opportunity. And so I want to bring this back to it may be a very small crack in the window. I am not suggesting it's a Grand Canyon opportunity, but it is a crack. And so how can the people of South Carolina in this very moment, and, the people of Kentucky, because I'm sorry, Mitch McConnell is not alive either.
And Florida. Any place in the South right now.
Right. But, when we've got these very powerful humans who are leaving the mortal coil, and Mitch wasn't running for re-election anyway, but he's his governor, different from South Carolina. The governor of Kentucky is a Democrat and will likely appoint somebody in Mitch McConnell's seat who identifies as a Democrat, which I'm not applauding the Democrats. We've all gone there before, and I'm not a supporter of the Democrats, but it's not a Republican, and our margin in the Senate right now in the U.S. Senate is very small. I wrote it down. It's 53 Republican to 47 Democrat. It's a very tiny, tiny majority. And so with every person that's not in that seat that doesn't fill that R designation, we have another window crack, to try to affect some change and slow the progress of Project 2025, slow the progress of the harm that the Senate is doing, because it is a powerful space. And as the electorate, we have to remember that we do have power, even when there are so many efforts to take those powers away. We have to remember that we do have power, but we have to show up to try.
We have to show up.
We have to show up. And so for anybody that's listening in South Carolina and in Kentucky, because you next, is you got to show up. You got to show up. It's a small crack, but man, small cracks can be, and South Carolina knows this. When your windshield gets busted in South Carolina, you need to get it fixed. When it gets cracked during the summertime, especially in the spring and early summer, you need to fix that crack, because what happens when the temperatures get as high as they get in South Carolina, that crack will split all the way across the windshield because of the temperature change. The crack can affect change, but we got to show up for it, folks. So
make sure it's change. And then also we need to talk about, maybe on our next episode just coming in, on within that crack, what the suggestions are for the seat to be filled. Yeah. Right. And then that is also an opportunity for us to look at what's possible.
Yeah. So stay tuned. We will carry on this conversation next time. Thank you, my friend.
Thanks for joining us. Until next time, as you move throughout your day, continue to ask yourself,
Why Do I Give a Fuck is produced in collaboration with Johanna and Diane. Music by Norwegian musician Water. See you next time.